have a solution to the last question. We should just clone Randy Antic. That would solve all of our problems. I'm here to talk about truth, and it's having a really bad season. Everywhere you look, the institutions that were designed many decades ago to advance truth face new struggles in the age of new information in the digital spaces. Educators, scientists, journalists, civic leaders, business leaders. And we at the Pew Research Center studies these issues about truth and trust because they're so central to the health of a society. And we're finding that American culture is very downcast these days. Just before the 2016 election, 81% of American adults said the supporters of Donald Trump and the supporters of Hillary Clinton could not agree on the basic facts of what's going on in the world. Just after the election, 64% of Americans said that fake news was causing a lot of confusion about what was going on in public life. The problem has even reached the personal level. 26% of all Americans, including almost half of those under age 30, say that false information about them has been posted online and damaged their reputations. I want to tell you a story now about why truth struggles to find a foothold in this new environment. And I want to stress, though, that even though I'm talking about a major news event, the dynamic I'm describing applies to almost every other domain where people care about truth and are trying to advance the story of truth. The story begins last October 1st when Stephen Paddock broke through the window of his hotel room overlooking the Las Vegas Strip and began firing into the crowd below. He ended up killing 58 people and wounding 422 others. Within minutes of the start of the shooting, a discussion broke out on the PAL channel of the 4chan online message board. Now, 4chan is a very dark corner of the internet, and the PAL channel is specifically devoted to politically incorrect conversation. The users on that channel immediately began to game plan how they could make it look like the shooter was a left-winger. Control the narrative. Don't let fake news control the narrative was one of the discussion threads they led. Shortly after the police announced that Paddock, the shooter's ex-wife, Mary Lou Danley, was a person of interest, the trolls began to focus on another target in their work, and it was Danley's ex-husband, a guy named Jerry Danley, who had nothing to do with the shooting. But he was a really convenient target because his Facebook profile showed that he was a supporter of MSNBC's Rachel Maddow and of the left-leaning group MoveOn.org. As the 4chan PAL channel built, sympathetic websites began to adopt the story that Mr. Danley, not the real shooter Paddock, was the shooter, and it was potentially tied to his liberal politics. This is the story that ran on Gateway Pundit. Over on Google, which is primed during the course of major breaking news stories to emphasize brand new information that comes to the story, and particularly to elevate a lot of stories that were getting search queries, it picked up the conversation about Danley being the shooter. Again, he's not the guy. Paddock is the guy. But Google elevated that story to a prominent place on its news page. On Facebook, the news elevating system ended up highlighting a story that was false, that came out from the Russian-backed news system Sputnik, that said that ISIS, the terror group, was trying to claim credit for the shooting. And finally, on YouTube, there were prominent videos that falsely claimed that the people who were being interviewed on TV about the shooting, in other words, the people who had been shot at, were actually so-called crisis actors who had been hired by the government to stage fake news stories that would help liberal causes. The unfolding info war over the worst mass shooting in American history showed how a band of extremists, conspiracy theorists, and foreign propagandists could essentially hijack a news story and use the tools of social media to sow a lot of confusion. So this story, I think, illustrates the three big things that make it hard for truth to find its footing these days. The first thing is that we live in a world of total noise. There's so much more information swirling around now, it's just hard to sort through it, even for ordinary folks in ordinary times. What the new anti-truthers exploit now is how confusing it is to get through this system, and they're not so much planting information in the hopes that people will believe false facts. Their real motive is just to sow enough doubt and confusion that the people who care about the facts give up in their search and begin to distrust the institutions that are trying to deliver the truth to them. There's a wonderful word for that process, and it was coined by Stanford history professor Robert Proctor. The word is agnotology, and it combines two Greek words, agno, not knowing, logi, the science of not knowing. And it turns out the new anti-truthers are wonderful at the practice of agnotology. In a world overflowing with information, the mere act of creating doubt in people's minds turns out to be a spectacularly successful strategy for disrupting social cohesion. The second reason truth struggles in the current environment, it ties to political polarization and how it affects people's judgments about civic information and even about each other. In the past generation, America's political parties have ideologically purified themselves. A generation ago, there used to be a decent share of people who were liberal who called themselves Republican, and there were a decent share of people who were conservative who called themselves Democrats. And those are the people who often got together and figured out how to come up with solutions and new programs. But nowadays, the average Republican is more conservative than 93% of Democrats. The average Democrat is more liberal than 94% of Republicans. The center is vanishing. In addition, at the personal level, people in both camps now increasingly say that those on the other side are awful human beings who are trying to destroy the country. Increasingly, people in both camps say the other side is full of people who are closed-minded, immoral, dishonest, and unintelligent. So that means this environment now is full of people who are not necessarily motivated by sharing facts and coming up with solutions or coming up with at least a shared version of experience. They're motivated to mount arguments that make my team look great and the other team look despicable. The third problem that's highlighted by this story is that the new businesses tied to the attention economy, the social media platforms, incentivize what political cartoonist Tim Kreider calls outrage porn. The business model of these companies, of course, is to gather up as much of our attention as possible and then sell it to advertisers. And facts and information don't engage people nearly as much as the emotionally incendiary stuff does. That's what keeps people coming back for likes and clicks and stuff like that. So these systems are arranged to outrage folks and then exploit two non-human actors, algorithms and bots, to sort of guarantee that the stuff that I get in my info stream on a social media platform lights up my emotional hot buttons, and the stuff you get in your streams lights up yours. Oftentimes, we don't even share the same facts. It's a formula for alienation. So how do we start making progress against these forces? A great place to start, of course, is the lessons of history. American scholar Elizabeth Eisenstein wrote a magnificent book called The Printing Press as an Agent of Change, in which she looked at the world after the year 1450, when the printing press came into being, and described all the changes that came when information became much, much cheaper to produce and much easier to spread. Well, it turns out that some of the prominent beneficiaries of the printing press were the fake news promoters of the time. It was people who believed in alchemy, people who practiced witchcraft, people who subscribed to the occult, people who practiced folklore. It turns out that those kinds of groups got about another 150 years worth of life because they were so effective at exploiting these new communication mechanisms to spread the word about themselves and find supporters. Of course, a couple of generations after the printing press was invented, we did get the scientific revolution and some really wonderful ideas about truth and facts. One of the breakthroughs from the scientific revolution was the idea that truth is best established through a process of induction. That is, gathering facts and evidence and analyzing them. That's a much better way to get to the truth than the process of deduction, which is just thinking about stuff really hard. A second breakthrough idea was the notion that truth is best extracted from data that are gathered dispassionately, not by self-promoting activists, but people who are curious and wanted to know answers to big questions. And one of the best ways to show dispassion in the gathering of evidence is to use numbers and statistics. You know, they're only a couple of 100 years old as an idea, but it's a wonderful way to show that you are using an honest method of gathering information. The third big idea that came out of this scientific revolution is that truth is really not conclusively established until the researchers share their data and findings with others so that they can be fact-checked and verified by other analysts. Now, it turns out that when we talk to thousands of technologists about the future of truth, those lessons from history came up pretty prominently in a lot of their answers. We recently did a survey of experts, both technologists and scholars, about the future of truth, and about half of the respondents said that things in the coming years are going to get better for truth. And about half said that's not the case. The people who were most downcast in their ideas tended to be technologists who basically said, trolls will always find ways to use new tools to torment people. They basically said human nature is immutable and manipulable. We're all tribal, and we can all be victimized by any of these new tools. Those who gave the more hopeful answers did cite some of those lessons from history, and they had a somewhat larger time frame to their answers. They basically said the stuff we were talking about can be applied to the current moment and the moment in the future. For starters, we are in the golden age of data, and even more so in the future. And the people who practice induction, who analyze data and make meaning out of it, are going to have a field day for as far into the future as anybody can imagine. The second thing they talk about is that there are software tools that are better and better and better at analyzing those data and increasingly are able to minimize human biases in the analysis of the data and to marginalize the worst actors in the new information ecosystem. The third idea they embraced from the past is more education. You might remember that one of the great things that came pretty far after the scientific revolution was we finally got universal education. These hopeful technologists say that we're going to move into an era where it will be essential for all of us to develop new literacies and new learning based around tech savviness, information savviness, and even algorithm savviness. So the world these hopeful people are thinking about is essentially a cyborg world, a world where humans and artificial intelligence machines work together to elevate truth and suppress falsity. Which brings me to a wonderful story about the cyborg, the human-machine search for truth that's told by a great technology pundit named Nicholas Thompson. You might remember Watson, the artificial intelligence system developed by IBM. Watson became famous because it beat the galactic world champion of Jeopardy, Ken Jennings, in a televised showdown. So Watson beat a human being. Great day. Well, there were lots of practice runs of Watson before he went on camera, or whatever it is, he, she, it, AI, beat Ken Jennings. So they went through lots of practice runs, and during one of the practice runs, the question that was put to Watson was, complete this phrase, Toto, I have a feeling we're, and Watson immediately came up with the answer, we're not in Kansas anymore. One of the special features of Watson, of course, that it spits out lots of other answers and then rank orders them by the probability that they're correct. So the second answer Watson gave to the Toto question was the name Steve Porcaro. Turns out Porcaro was the keyboardist for the pop band Toto. So linking him and Toto wasn't a ridiculous thing, even though it wasn't the right answer. But Watson's third answer to the Toto question was ridiculous. The kung fu actor Jackie Chan. Now, nobody could make sense of that, and when Nicholas Thompson, the pundit, wrote up a piece about the Watson preparations for the showdown, he basically used the Jackie Chan answer as an example of showing AI might be great, but it's got a ways to go still because it still generates ridiculous answers like this. So Thompson writes up this thing, and his piece appears in the New York Times on its website. And it turns out that a commenter on his piece on the website figured out the Toto-Jackie Chan connection. So here I'm going to show you a scene from the movie Rush Hour 1, where a street-savvy American detective is working with a detective from Hong Kong, played by Jackie Chan. The Chan character is in the United States to investigate a kidnapping, and in this scene, he and the American are discussing how they're going to work together. Oh, sorry. One more back. Okay, here.
This man try us.
My bad.
You must take me to see Consul Han right away.
Man, just sit there and shut up. This ain't no democracy.
Yes, it is.
No, it ain't. This is the United States of James Carter now. I'm the president, I'm the emperor, I'm the king. I'm Michael Jackson, you Tito. Your ass belong to me.
Okay, now here's a scene from the sequel to that movie, Rush Hour 2, in which the two detectives are joined, and it refers to this scene while they're in a karaoke bar in Hong Kong.
This man try us, the most deadly gang in China.
You think that scared me? I'm from Los Angeles. We invented gangs. Give me that badge.
No, you're a civilian. In Hong Kong, I'm Michael Jackson, you're Toto.
You mean Tito? Toto is what we ate last night for dinner. Now give me that badge.
No.
Give it.
And that's how Toto got into Jackie Chan's life, so Jackie Chan wasn't a ridiculous answer to the Jeopardy question. Maybe that's the cyborg story of how we're going to get to the truth using humans and machines. The artificial intelligence system will be an essential component of it, but it will take that commenter on that website, that human actor, to put the final puzzle piece together and get to the truth. Thanks very much.